here I'm going to recite something from Kirit Joshi. It can at once be seen that if these claims of yoga are valid, then we shall be able to have, through yogic methods, that knowledge which can possibly break the vicious cycle of the crisis of the present day and deliver us into new possibility of a better humanity and a better world. So this really mirrors some of the aspirations of many of the gurus that have brought yoga to the West, is that they have hoped that through inspiring Europeans and, let's say, the West, colonized countries to engage with a deeper way of living, a deeper way of being, a deeper exploration of the self in order to develop the kind of critical faculty that we call viveka. And by taking on some of the restraints of yoga, the yamas and niyamas, it can restrain our behaviours. So not only are we able to have better self-awareness and more control over our bodies in order to behave in a more restrained way, we have some guiding precepts as to how we should engage with the world, which we would call dharma or swadharma. So that was, as far as I can surmise, the intention behind the delivery of yoga into outside of the standard traditional context. But what actually happened? Now, I would recommend that anybody who wants to understand the critiques of Western yoga and why it is that there is a existing contention over the difference between traditional and Western forms of yoga, just simply go onto Google search and follow back the Yoga Journal editions going back to 1976. So cultural representations on Yoga Journal covers between 1976 and 2018 trace the influences on American yoga from traditional roots with initiates of Sampradaya who travelled to America to spread the teachings. For Australia, we would travel to India because we were still too small to really attract the attention of these world gurus. The rise in popularity of yoga and distribution of the magazine are indicated by increased frequency of publication. A survey of Yoga Journal covers outlines the entire archive and sample size for their study of representations of women. So there is an article there by Webb in 2017 that has surveyed Yoga Journal covers in regards to its representation of women. And if you follow through, you will see that in 1976 through to around 1987, most of the representations of yoga were grounded in some kind of traditional representation. We have the faces of gurus who are dressed in the robes of a swami. We have imagery of Hindu iconography. And then in 1982, we have a man in a business suit. And basically these imagery of men in business suits, it coincides with the industrialization and commercialization of yoga. And so here we're not looking so much at a British imperialist colonial lens. We're looking at American neoliberal lens. So then from the 1980s, we've got the corporate yoga phenomenon. And that's when we started to have big business people coming out of the blue and saying, hey, I do yoga and it's really great. It actually helps me to conduct my business, to be more efficient and, for all of the benefits to stress relief and so forth. So 1980s was really when corporate yoga came in, and all the way through to the 90s, you have very sort of sporadic representation of the Hindu forms, and mostly it's New Age. And it goes all the way into the 2000s, and from there on, you can see that all of the yoga journal covers are of people in asana. And they are not beginners asanas. These are very advanced asanas, like the full Natarajasana, and, you know, very pronounced back bends. And then by about 2007, it's mostly women. It's in lycra and white women. And so all the way through until 2010, it's almost all white women. And then you start to see different bodies and different skin tones being represented by 2014. And still mostly all of the representations are of white women doing yoga. Now that kind of does reflect what happened in America, and that is white women who were the majority demographic took to yoga, and most of the teachers are women, and there was maybe 6% of the participants that were Asian, which sort of roughly coincides with the demographic in America. But most of them were, you know, not wearing what we would think would be yogic representation. They were wearing tight clothing that revealed their bodies. They were emphasizing the physical over the spiritual, and in time, the spiritual side of things, the Hindu side of things, the Sanskrit, and pretty much everything aside from asana was marginalized. And so the critique against cultural appropriation is not just one about it being Hindu or not Hindu, it's about whether or not Western representations and teachings of yoga really are still yoga. They're a reduced, fragmented form of yoga that has been extracted from millennia of tradition. It's been hyper separated from the traditional authority, which we know from our Brahmana system. It cannot simply center on asana practice. And that way it's become commoditized, it's become productivized, it's been sold on the market, and the authority about what yoga is shifted from the traditions, and it became anglicized, and the authorities of the yoga movement became white women predominantly, or white men, gurus in their own, you know, self-making. And I think this is where it started to really irritate the Hindu community, and understandably so, because watching this from here in Australia with a traditional background that was integral yoga, that had it had the eightfold path. So it wasn't just the fact that it was reduced to asana, it was removing deliberately in a destructive way the full range of experience and practice from the eightfold path, and the surrounding forms of yoga that had been conducted traditionally in an integral system, like karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, There's Laya yoga, you know, there's Hatha yoga, Kriya yoga. There's so many different varieties, Raja yoga, that didn't have a place anymore. And if you wanted to come in there and teach something that wasn't this reduced model, basically you wouldn't find an audience, because the audience had been groomed, the market had been groomed into accepting asana. And in my experience as a yoga teacher, the recreation centres or the places where you could teach and have a handful of students, they didn't want you anymore. So chanting Om and chanting the invocation that we chanted when we began, Om Sahana Bhavatu, these type of things had to be extricated. So it was the industry that then started to shape how yoga was conducted and how yoga was represented and the transmission of the teachings. So it separated from the guru disciple model and became mass market model. So one teacher to 30 different students that may or may not continue to come to classes. Everything changed. So yoga is traditionally a one-to-one relationship, and the reason why it's one-to-one is that every student comes with something of their own conditions, and every student is variously receptive to the teachings. And so we have different upayas that are relevant for each of the students, and the students will uptake those teachings in their own particular manner. And so the teacher is there really to give the student the knowledge and the techniques and to guide the student through, so that not only are the teachings protected and quality controlled, but that the student doesn't get injured psychologically, physically, in any spiritually, because it's conducted within a set of protocols. And so when yoga is taken outside those protocols and it's reduced down to one particular practice, maybe they include a little pranayama and 10 minutes like laying down at the end of it, that's what we call reductionism. And the reductionist worldview, the Industrial Revolution and the capitalist economy are the philosophical, technological and economic components of the same process. So basically the argument from ecofeminism, that's from Vandana Shiva, it critiques reductionism and commoditization and colonial extraction because it sees it happening in so many different spheres, not just the traditional knowledge of yoga, but the traditional knowledge of anything. It could be medicine, it could be seeds, it could be art, it could be anything. But when it's removed from the cultural matrix and it's productivized, reduced down to something that makes profit outside and doesn't benefit back the community, then that is a kind of colonial violence. And it's not the type of colonial imperialism when we're talking about settler colonialism, but it still reiterates the same patterns of violence. Okay, and some of the epistemological methodology, epistemes and methodologies within academia are specifically designed to perpetuate that pattern, and by specifically objectification of traditional knowledge, objectification, separation of yourself from the relationship with the subject. And in the case of yoga, it's almost across the board that the cultures from which these teachings are brought to us are negated. So we may hear about place names, we may hear about dates, we may hear about other, groups within which these teachings are negotiated through these type of arguments, or some say these reactions to, or it's this dichotomy that's always ongoing within this literature, where it's only seen as a intellectual, it's intellectual capital removed from the cultural milieu. And unfortunately, this has an effect. So I'm going to read, this may shock people. One of the issues that we hear about with cultural appropriation, and there's a lot of backlash, and I'm not saying that there's one particular view, I'm saying there's probably many views. But I think one of the more challenging positions, which should be taken not only in light of yoga, but in light of other types of Indigenous knowledge, commoditisation and reduction, or colonial relationship where it's restricted or taken away from the community. We should understand this in the broader perspective of cultural continuity and the impact that the ways in which we conduct ourselves with other cultures has upon those cultures for the long term. So in Australia, and I can't speak on behalf of Indigenous Australians, however, I can speak from some observation. We had similar patterns of violence against First Nations people here as we see in India. And I have been able to learn from what I have been taught about these patterns to guide my my worldview when it comes to understanding yoga as traditional knowledge. So aside from the violence against persons, the physical violence, the enslavement, the wage slavery, and the use of the bodies of the Indigenous inhabitants of this country for the gratification of the master, who I'll call the colonial class, there was a stripping away of the children of the community, called the stolen generation, and their re-education and their being reared within missions. So in missions, they were not allowed to speak their language. They were not allowed to have a relationship with their families. They were isolated apart from them. I've read stories of these children being scrubbed to have their blackness removed, and the brutality with which the British education system was physically as well as verbally taught to them. In those days, there were very few limitations on violence toward children. It wasn't illegal. And there are many, many stories of child abuse that have arisen from these missions and institutions in general. And so as a part of the genocidal process, language and every other aspect of culture, their spiritual practice, the knowledge that comes from an oral tradition, because they did not have a written tradition, they had an oral tradition, okay? Just like we have alongside the written tradition in yoga. And that is given immense amounts of importance, because in there is all of the knowledge. And so it was passed on, one of the ways it was passed on, and I'm not an expert, but through storytelling. And this is what I've experienced with my gurus, is that many times my teachings have made more sense to me through storytelling than through these kind of highfalutin terms, and it's been made contextualized, and it makes more sense to me. So storytelling, passing on oral traditions, this was all conducted within their kinship systems, and being removed from those systems contributed to a different kind of genocide, which is generally called cultural genocide, and it leads to epistemicide, which is the, you know, annihilation of knowledge. I'm going to have a quote now from Patrick Wolf. He's a very, very interesting Australian genocide studies scholar. Whereas the Holocaust exonerates anti-Semitic Western nations who were on the side opposing the Nazis, those same nations have nothing to gain from their liability for colonial genocides. On the historical as well as categorical grounds, therefore, the hyphenated genocides, ethnocide, indigenocide, cultural genocide, etc., devalue Indigenous attrition. No such problem bedevils analysis of the logic of elimination, which in its specific to settler colonialism is premised on the securing and the obtaining and maintaining of territory. So what he calls, he states that these frameworks within which genocide were conducted were secondary, and that the primary motive of the colonizer is to obtain territory. Now, in the neoliberal colonial setting, territory means anything that, control over anything that can be extracted, that is of value to this industrial machine. So this type of cultural genocide forms part of the overall genocide process, and it takes time. It has to be maintained. So the structure of oppression have to be maintained over time. And one of the ways that they're maintained is when the authority over knowledge and the parameters within which that knowledge is known are taken out of the traditional context, taken away from the Indigenous people. And in the case of our tradition of Kashmiri Shaivism, the peoples and the cultural matrix from which this knowledge is arises are negated in the same way as the knowledge of Indigenous, the cultures of Indigenous people have been negated all over the world. And so backgrounding, here we go with the model. Backgrounding is when you deny the value of the people's knowledge. So say we're talking about oral tradition, we're denying the value because it can't be empirically verified, there's no textual sources, there's no, you know, we don't know for sure what these artifacts mean, or this archaeological, you know, the Shiva, the seal, the Pashupati seal, we're not sure what that means, so therefore we can't say that yoga goes back that far. These type of assumptions strip out the value of an oral tradition which has been handed down from guru to disciple, and replace it with, okay, we're going to use an empirical model that says, oh, we don't know for sure if that was yoga or not. So we're not going to say that yoga is 5,000 years old. You'll find this everywhere you turn if you go onto the internet and you try and understand. So radical exclusion is hyperseparation, which it means that, okay, so I'm gonna explain this in Val Plumwood's terms. So basically, the master uses a thing called values dualism. Values dualism is when this masculine white male type of mentality that ran alongside Eurocentrism, it calls itself, you know, it becomes the center, and the center defines itself, and then it excludes everything else, everyone else, as the feminine. Okay, so because of the patriarchal system, the argument goes, the analysis goes The white male was the head of the family. They were the heads of the church. Women were excluded from the means of spiritual production. They were excluded from the economy. They were excluded from education. And so therefore, over time, these structures persisted, and they still haven't been fully rectified. So the white male was valued. Okay, and everything that he associated as his own, which was those masculine principles of being strong, being rational, not being emotional, being civilized, being highly cultured, being knowledgeable, knowledge holders. This is the atomistic expert model, which we still see in academia. And they were models of the transcendent, which was a male at the same time. So all of those things which were valued in society were the principles which males attributed to themselves, and everything that was not like that was associated with nature and the feminine. And Indigenous peoples, the natural world, non-human species, women and children, and obviously everything that they believed, so the ways that they understood their life world, their knowledge, their traditional knowledge systems, the ways that they conducted their lives, they were regarded as uncivilized. So you have this trope throughout the literature, and I'd like to point out even in this text here, which informs some of Gandhi's civil disobedience, Henry David Thoreau refers to savages, barbarians. There's pagans have been used in certain contexts. So basically, everything that wasn't European was uncivilized, and it was the role of the white colonizer to go along and civilize them and teach them the ways of the civilized world, etc., which impacted on education. So that actually continues through the decentering of authority from the yogic tradition to the academy, and the decentering of authority from the transmission of yoga in the yoga industry. So as an alternative, let's understand some kind of yogic worldview. Now, I'm going to just rely on the tradition that I've been learning through teachers which are part of, which are students of Swami Lakshmanjoo. And I'll just check the time because this is the next part. Good, I'm okay. So students of Lakshmanjoo have taught me. I have taken, again, a traditional approach to my academic studies. Let's just turn this off. And part of that was because I wanted to see how far I could get as well, not just to honour my tradition, which I'm going to honour anyway, but on top of that, I wanted to see how far I could go as a scholar, practicing the traditional way, only learning scriptures that had come directly to me either through the mouth of my guru, through the recordings, from his students, through the parampara, from the other authorized acharyas. I only took teachings from those which were conformed with the traditional method. And I think I have managed quite well. Ahimsa is the first precept that we normally take when we begin practicing yoga. And non-violent communication, non-violent epistemologies, non-violent engagement with Indigenous cultures, these are all, you know, principles which are throughout the literature. We need to find alternative ways than continuing to inflict cultural or epistemic violence on Indigenous peoples and their knowledge. And people may say, well, I'm not doing that. Well, I can't say whether people do it or they don't, except through what I read. And I can say that it's still going from what I've read. I can see it throughout the literature. I'm not saying everybody does it, but ahimsa and non-violence, this is what it means in our tradition. Subtle non-violence is wherein the effects of one's actions or words are taken into account. So everything that we say, whether it's to our children, our partners, our friends, our colleagues, everything that we say that comes out of our mouth as yogic practitioners, we are supposed to check. Is it specifically designed to hurt people? Is it likely to hurt people? What is the effect of what we're saying likely to be? So I'm trying to take care of what I'm saying so that people are not aggravated by what I'm saying, but at the same time, we have another restraint, which I'll talk about next. If words are to cause violence, anger, or hatred, it is not non-violence. So if I say something to somebody specifically to agitate them, and I know that it's going to agitate them, for example, if I make Hindu-phobic slurs, or if I, without having enough evidence, deliberately make a claim, a truth claim within the literature that negates and actually diminishes the oral tradition of yoga without any seeming value to it, then that's not non-violent. So the way that we produce our knowledge should also be non-violent. And I do have examples. I won't go into them here because I think this is just an overview. Now, ecologically speaking, this non-violent communication arouses empathic regard for other beings by restraining and being observant of one's effects on them. Being concerned for the well-being of others and knowing that harming them harms yourself contributes to, in our tradition, the realization of our oneness with other beings, samavesha. We have practices specifically designed to insert ourselves into other beings, feel as if we are in those other beings, that we are actually seeing from that positionality of other beings. This is in the Vijnana Bhairava, and repeatedly Swamiji tells us that all beings have this nature, all beings are Shiva consciousness, and that even in those inert material forms, they are all still comprised of this same divinity. And so this kind of understanding invokes a respect for other beings. Honesty, asteya and satyam. Truth or satyam should not generate destruction and animosity. It should be spoken bearing in mind time and circumstances and not to deliberately cause problems. This is what Swamiji says. Non-lying is necessary, okay? So if I make a claim and it's not quite true, if I don't have substantial grounds for it, if I'm just making an interpolation or a suggestion based on my own subjective viewpoint of these traditional knowledge forms, whether it's literature or archaeological, or it could be any aspect of this cultural knowledge, then I shouldn't be lying about it. I need to represent the teachings in the way that they are represented in the scriptures. So when it comes to making analyses as a cultural studies, literary studies type of scholar, then I should be careful not to impose a framework onto this knowledge from a foreign perspective that has no place from the tradition. I should be careful not to impose that over the tradition, because that's not honest. So if I speak truth, if you speak truth, if we all speak truth to the best of our ability, and reality as it is, we say it as it is to the best of our ability, then there is a power of truth which is granted from this. So dishonesty and theft go hand in hand. So taking what is not ours is theft. Greed for what is not deserved or trying to accomplish something for myself at the detriment of others is a type of dishonesty, and there's injunctions against it within yoga. To seize status or respect through objective disregard for others. So objective disregard for others in Indology refers to when I represent, something which is totally non-sexual as a sexual object, or in tantric industry, you'll find that there's all kinds of Orientalism and sexualization of what we would regard as highly sacred within our tradition. So equating Shiva lingams with a sex toy, and worshipping, objects as if they are equivalent to the tantric teachings. So greed for what is not deserved or trying to accomplish something for yourself without considering anyone else. Depriving others of what is rightfully theirs by blackmail or the maneuvering of influence. Now, maneuvering of influence refers in this context, if I apply it, to when I make a claim over traditional knowledge over which I have no initiation or I have no authority from the authorized knowledge cultural custodians, then that is a kind of maneuvering of power. It's a maneuvering of influence. So mental theft of not worrying about others and only taking care of ourselves is also restrained. So I've talked about yoga and cultural appropriation. I've looked at some of the ethics with regard to how we should conduct ourselves as scholars. I've reframed yoga as Indigenous traditional knowledge. We've discussed pretty much all of these things here. And now I would like to just emphasize some points about the traditional knowledge production methodology. Now, there are rules. We can't simply, as students, if I'm a student of a guru, I can't simply then go and become the mouthpiece of yoga. So I'm speaking now with the knowledge of my learned friends and with the knowledge of my teachers. What I'm actually saying, they may not be aware of, but in general, I make myself accountable to my teachers, and then they can critique me, they can guide me, and they can get me back on track. But I don't have any authority to speak on behalf of my tradition. And as a person who speaks about yoga, and in a context where cultural appropriation has become a problem of cultural, it's been linked to cultural genocide, and it's been linked to colonial extraction, then it's not correct for people who are not authorized to then go ahead and determine how yoga should be spoken about, who has the authority on yoga, unless we're going to negate the traditional knowledge production methodology. So if my teacher then says to me, okay, Sarah, you can speak about this topic, then I can speak about the topic. But if I don't have that authority as a representative of my tradition, which I don't, I'm not a representative of my tradition, then I should not present myself in a dishonest manner. And this is where I think the major contention comes, because not only people who are now presenting themselves as authorities of yoga from outside the traditions, rewriting what yoga is, redefining it, reframing it, but they don't have the authority from the traditions to do it. And there is a kind of political dichotomization happening where we've got people who are saying, well, we can do whatever we want, you know, taking this sort of postmodern view of there's no universal truth and everything's relative. And then instead of simply owning that, we have a whole range of criticisms getting thrown back onto the traditions, where traditions as a whole are being blamed for the actions of a specific number of gurus who have abused their power and authority, and that then reflects back onto the tradition. So then, because of this sort of unresolved schism, I think that it's important for academics, particularly in cultural studies like myself, to start to understand the differences between Indigenous epistemology and understand that there is value to that for academia, that we can actually learn a lot from encompassing a broader range of knowledge production methods. And it need not be a polarized battle. It could be conducted in a non-violent way, like a Purva way, where, you know, we set out our competing arguments and, you know, we negotiate it constructively. However, in every other discipline, when it comes to diversity and cultural inclusion, cultural competence, cultural appropriateness, there seems to be concern, because of the history of colonialism, that we conduct ourselves in a non-violent manner, and we allow, you know, for equal opportunities. We support people who are from marginalised communities. I mean, this is a general social justice perspective. And so even if there are competing arguments, they should be conducted in a way that's culturally appropriate, especially if we occupy a positionality of a formerly colonised class like myself, and, you know, look at some alternatives to how knowledge is produced. And some of the ways that we can do that are actually already existing within sustainability studies. There's a calling forth from the United Nations for environmental protection and for sustainability, that we honour Indigenous culture, that we protect it, because there's knowledge there that we need as a global society. And the same can be said of the traditional knowledge of yoga, and in particular from our tradition. So I'm going to tie it up now, because I know it's going on. Surendra Mohan, can you tell me how I'm going for time? Have I finished? Have I used up all my time?
Hello. Hello. Yeah, Sarah. You can compete with Sadyojata mantra, please. Yeah.
Okay. Sadyojatam prapadyame, sadyojataya ve namo namaha, bhave bhave nati bhave bhavaswamam, bhavudbhavaya namaha, Vamadevaya namo, Jashtaya namo, Shvestaya namo, Rudraya namo, Kalaya namo, Kalavikarnaya namo, Balavikarnaya namo, Balaya namo, Balakamatanaya namo, Sarvabhutiramanaya namo, Manunmanaya namaha. Agora hebyo, agora hebyo, agora taribyaha, sarva hebya, sarva sharva hebyo, namaste asturu drarupebyaha, tatpurashaya vidmahe mahadevaya dhimahi, tanno rudra prachodayata. Ishvara sarva vidyanam, ishana sarva bhutanam, Brahmadipati, Brahmanodipati, Brahma Shivo me astu sada Shivom. Hari Om Tat Sat. I normally refer to my book, my mantra Pushpam, when I'm still reciting that. Have we got questions? Let's go to questions now.
Yeah, questions. Any discussion, any suggestion, any question? All are welcome, please.
Okay, we've got a good question there. I'm going to go to both of them. Now, epistemology generally means how we know what it is to be known. And in the Hindu context, you have so many different kinds of epistemology, but I've just centered on our tradition and our means of knowing. But normally the means of knowledge are presented in the texts. So you'll have, each different text will have its own means of knowledge. So like I said before, the pramanas are the knowledge from the scriptures in our tradition, and knowledge from the guru, and then knowledge of our practices. And these form a means of understanding the teachings that are reflexively shift back and forward. So if I take a verse from a scripture and I ruminate on it in my meditation, and then I can ask my guru, hey, Swamiji, can you please help me? Because I was reading this particular verse about, I don't know, the relationship between the organ of perception, the object of perception, and the perceiving subject, you know, and I want to understand more about that. And am I doing the right thing? So that's how Pramana works in our tradition. You can't simply pick up a book and read it and expect to understand what it means. You need to experientially understand it, as well as to have your understanding critically evaluated by your guru. So in that context, that's what our epistemology means. And if we want to expand on our epistemology, well, in our tradition, we have this tripartite world. So we have the self, and we have Shiva and Shakti. Basically, there's all these different tripartite models. But when we apply that, we can see that, okay, we have a transcendental aspect of our being. We have a self which is in relationship with that transcendental aspect. And then we have the dynamic, you know, immanent reality that is unfolding as Shakti around us perpetually. So this is a kind of worldview which informs the ways in which we understand all of our literature, that there is no separation between the transcendental and the immanent realities, and that each small aspect of reality contains in its essence the greater reality. So it's a microcosm, macrocosm. So this epistemology shapes everything that we understand, and it informs all of the ways in which the texts are explained to us. So they put a gloss onto these texts, and different systems will have different worldviews. So an epistemology is a worldview, and you'll see that, say, if we have the Bhagavad Gita, for example, we have our own Bhagavad Gita, and you'll see that there's different interpretations of this scripture according to the Trika worldview than what you'll find in other texts. And this is the classic example of what I'm just saying. O Arjuna, I am situated in each and every heart of individuals, not only men, i.e. humans, even mosquitoes, also worms. Whatever lifeful or lifeless thing that exists, I am existing in their hearts. So in other teachings, you may find that, you know, certain classes of beings may not be so privy to being divine, or certainly in the mechanistic model of Western empirical science, you'll find that the spirit that animates this reality has been cast out. And so their epistemology subscribes to this mechanistic model that says that this manifest universe is not the divine. This manifest universe is sort of dominion of man, but we can do with it as we wish. And it reduces everything down to kind of soulless and objects which we can manipulate. So that's why we've kind of, one of the reasons why we're in this situation is this epistemology that doesn't recognize the divinity within all beings, which is why I employ this epistemology for my understanding of ecology and social justice. Because fundamentally, each and every step of the way, it's consistent. So I hope that answers the question.
Somebody next? In the chat box, Sarah, please see your chat box. Somebody has a question. What should be under book on epistemology? Some Pavan, Mr. Pavan has a that you can answer to that. Any standard book on Hindu epistemology he wants to know?
No. Oh, well, there's certainly different. You see, when it comes to academic epistemology, this is why I've raised this point here about the necessity of accepting Hindu philosophy as epistemological models. I mean, we've got so much written that can help us to formulate knowledge, and I haven't actually studied outside my discipline, but I'm aware that you know, we just have to apply it. So Hindu epistemology from each particular tradition is going to be according to their tradition. There's no like universal, this is the one way that we should do things. So you really need to grab the literature that your tradition, you know, accepts, and have a good read of it and find out, okay, what is the worldview of this particular scriptural doctrine, and how can I apply that to framing the knowledge that I produce? So I've used the epistemology of my tradition by applying it. So we need to build these models from the existing models and start applying them in our work. So Hindu epistemology models, well, do you need to read multiple texts? It depends. I mean, how are you producing your knowledge? Each different tradition. I mean, if you're going to study music or art or something that is what we would call a, see, we can't even separate those out from the religious or the spiritual practices, because it's all joined. So in yoga, I've used yoga as an example. We take what it is from within our tradition, which is accepted by that tradition, and we apply it, we employ it. And I would suggest that anybody who wishes to explore more about this, there's a Abhinav Gupta's works on aesthetics that may help, or I don't know how they're going to go about it. I don't know how they're going to go about it. Because is it in the universities? They're going to have to study the Sanskrit. This is the problem. Because it hasn't been articulated and applied so far within academia, because it's been Eurocentric. So this is what I'm suggesting, that we start to employ these worldviews. There's another question there.
No, thanks, Sarah. I think there are no questions, but very nice things. My regards for you have grown enormously. The way you have presented the things, the way you think, and of the myths and traditions elsewhere, legends and cultural genocide particularly, that you spoke about, that we have seen in Kashmir or in Goa or in several places all over India. India means this eternal India, the greater India, and you can find it everywhere. And of non-violence, you have told, and one of our great seers, Atharva, who had a great place in Kashmir also. Atharva, the great seer, whose Atharvaveda recension was there in Kashmir, his very name suggests non-violence. Atharva means non-violent. And so non-violence can be a policy. And the way to this epistemic model you have come to, Shimaraj, one of the students of disciples of Abhinav Gupta, he has a book, Pratyabhijna Hridaya. And one of the sutras, one of the aphorisms, it tells about Sarva Darsana Bhumayaha, all the epistemic models and all the metaphysical models, all those keep together, and the Trika model is at the top. So rightly you have told that the Trika model, the model of Abhinav Gupta, that comes at the highest. And you see, we start with the naturalist model. The naturalist model also is an Indian model. Much later, it went for the Greco-Roman modeling in Greece or elsewhere. But this naturalistic model, this also, the Bhagavad also speaks of this. And from there we start, we end up with the Trika model. There can nothing be more than the Trika model. The Trika model, the Pratyabhijna model, that is the highest. And not that Sarah doesn't know Sanskrit, she knows Sanskrit, she is learning more of it. She can immediately translate a Sanskrit words into English. And she is very good at it. And I suppose the way she chanted the mantras, the way she has love for Kashmir Saivism and sadhana, she is a sadhika actually. She is a sadhika and a researcher. And many of our great saints, even Abhinav Gupta, he was a sadhaka, great sadhaka. What is his introduction? He was a sadhaka, and we can't call him an academic. He was not an academic, he was not a poet, he was not a statesman. And what he was a great yogin, and he was Shiva. He was Shiva, just like that. Much later, this Shivacharya Lakshmanju Maharaj was also Amriteswar Bhairava. These people who found identity with Lord Shiva in different manners, different levels. One word in Gita tells about it, it is sadharmya. So they are all people with different levels of sadharmya. And certainly those are the great people, great persons that India or anywhere in the world, because there are sadhakas also elsewhere. And this has made our tradition very great. And I think it was a great lecture. It was much deeper and much wider than what earlier I supposed it to be. So I told you that my love and regard for Sarah has enormously grown, and I wish after this Corona bad times, sometimes you will find opportunity to come to Kurukshetra and visit this great Saivite place. This is one of the ancient, more Saivite seeds of learning. It's Pasupata basically, not Trika, but Pasupata also gave many things to Abhinav Gupta. He had a teacher in Pasupata, perhaps from Bengal. Perhaps he traveled away to Bengal to get a good knowledge of Pasupata. He had so many teachers, so many teachers he had. So that way, Sara, earlier he is named as Malini by a great Saivite teacher. And then she is Sara by her parents' name. And Sara also is an epithet of Durga in Saptasati Chandi, as we know. And now she is, as a translation of her name goes, and her family titles, etc. She is this Kumari, Ranakama, and Dwarika. And all these names, whether it is Malini or Sara or Kumari, Ranakama, Dwarika, they have great reflections on her personality and the work she is doing. And this work actually she is working for Kashmir, and Kashmir is the head of India, and perhaps has to come here, but and philosophy by character is nothing. So philosophy and conduct, they must be together. So for that, the Kashmiri Saivite sadhakas are known, for which Lalleswari is known, and now Lalleswari will be having her 700 years complete, and then that day also we shall be listening to Sara, international webinar for 2 days on 26th and 27th. So the way that Mr. Pavan raised a question, so the epistemology, the first book should be Gita, and Gita with Trika commentary, because Gita all around, because it has also been commented upon by naturalists, by pure atheist scientists. Just like B.A. Lal has a book on this, Gita in the Light of Modern Science. What modern science, European scientist science is, it is science God, without God. So that way we can do it. And if, I don't know if Brahmarshi Tirupati Swami has rejoined, has he rejoined? Oh, no, not yet. So at the end, we are very grateful to her for this lecture. And this lecture is a great milestone in our thinking towards Kashmir. And this is the way to think on Kashmir, because Kashmir is not only a geographical piece of land. Kashmir not only is another story of our history, or just a people who have been thrown out of Kashmir, those who have been killed and maimed and raped and whatnot. And cultural genocide is perhaps a little smaller word for that, what has happened to the Kashmiri people, our own brethren. And see what has happened August 5th, and another August 5th has gone with Ayodhya reclaiming the seat of Rama. And after August 5th, today, 74 years for independence, Indian independence, we are doing today, we are celebrating. And perhaps on this great occasion, the Sara, she presented her views. I think this is a great occasion to celebrate this speech of hers. And now, since Brahmarshi Swamiji is not here, I will request Dr. Vibha Agrawal, who is a professor of Sanskrit and Indian philosophy in Department of Sanskrit, and also at the same time she holds the chair of director of the Sanskrit and Indology Studies Institute in our Kurukshetra University. She will speak a few words and thank everyone here. Professor Vibha Agrawal, I think she's here, madam. Please do it.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. And I heartily thank Madam Sara for giving such a great lecture throwing light on all aspects of contemporary Indology, along with a historical review. She also mentioned some research papers which worked on this specific topic. She touched the various aspects regarding importance of storytelling, causes of cultural genocide, role of women, children, racial differences, and so many. And also she spoke about the role of Indian yoga in modern Indology, the Eightfold Path, the kinds of yoga, Raj Yoga, etc., which help to spread the application of Indian epistemology in modern Indology. As Dr. Mishra has very well said, that we can understand the cross-cultural trends in modern times in this light. I am much thankful, though I couldn't listen it properly due to some internet issues on my part, but the whole lecture was really informative. I got a very good knowledge, and I I feel very grateful that I came to know that a person from far away place thinks about India in this way and knows Sanskrit and have a deep respect for Sanskrit. Many thanks, and Madam Sara, and many thanks to all. I'm seeing Shri Hari Prasad ji and all the people who have joined here in this meet. And my special thanks are due to Dr. S.M. Mishra, who has organized this meet and has given us the opportunity to listen this kind of lecture from a person from Australia. Thanks a lot to everyone. To Ravi.
Just a minute. Just a minute. Hello.
Hello.
Just a minute. Hello.
Yes.
Swami Srihari Prasad is here.
Yes, sir.
Pranam Swamiji. Swamiji, pranams.
Pranam.
Swamiji is here.
Yes, sir.
Hello. Swamiji. Swamiji, kindly, I'm sorry to not locate you. I'm so happy. I'm so happy that you are here.
Keep the video.
We are so grateful for your gracious presence. Swamiji, this was something on Trika Saivism and Sri Peetam, where you are there, and our Sadguru. She was so much in favor of this tradition, this great tradition. And it is also a touch of Vaishnavism.
Yes.
This
They all come together.
Yeah, come together. Swamiji, just a few words. Swamiji, he is very. He has a heart for India, Kashmir, and tradition. And he is sadhika in Australia. And when these bad times are over, perhaps you'll come and also you'll come to Chennai to your place. Your blessing.
And
Swamiji, just a few words of your graceful, your blessings. Yeah.
I'd be very happy to receive you, madam, and to host you here in India.
Thank you so much, Swami Sri Hari Prasad ji. He is of that great Peetham, Sri Peetham in Chennai, very dear to where Sri Radha Krishnan happened to be there. His house is there in Mylapore, and he belongs to Kerala by his body originally, and he has been the General President of Indian Philosophical Congress 2 years back, and in his ashram, in his Sri Peetham, all religions do meet, and they do talk of Hinduism and our Vedas, and many yajnas also do happen there. It's such a pious place, such a great place of knowledge and action, jnana, karma, samuchaya, that Sri Peetham is an example of our true Hindu way of living. and thinking. So since he is here, we are highly grateful to him, and all of us pay our pranams and tributes to him, Swami Sri Hari Prasad ji. So with these words, we must say good day, and to Sara all our thanks and gratefulness, and to all people, Professor Ishwar Mittal, Madam Mittal, and other people whosoever have been here, just left Mr. Pavan, and some people, Pyari Lal, Priti Sharma, Rabinanjan Sen, Rajesh Chelia, Rajesh Kumar, and many people who earlier listened to the lecture. So we express our gratefulness and thanks to all of them. So with these words, Ravi Datta will now do the Kalyana mantra, and then we shall close this. Ravi Datta, yes.
सर्वेषां धन्यवादः। इदानीं कल्याणमन्त्रेण वयम् अस्य व्याख्यानस्य समापनं कुर्मः। ॐ पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः, सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः, सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु, मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति। नमस्ते।
Thank you all. Thanks.
You know.